Another edition of My Brother's Keeper. I'm sitting here with the mastermind TP Square, and we were just talking off camera about the Ahmaud Arbery trial, and that's the title of tonight's show: Ahmaud Arbery murder in black and white. And that's exactly what this case comes down to. You know, even from the outset, when Ahmaud Arbery was murdered on, I think it's Attila Drive in Brunswick, Georgia, there was an orchestrated cover-up on behalf of the police as well as the county prosecutor. In fact, the prosecutor has been arrested. Since when does a prosecutor, who by the way is immune from prosecution, get arrested? This case is egregious, even more so than George Floyd. More so, in my opinion, than the Trayvon Martin case. Now here you have the government, in this case, the prosecutor and the police down there. You know, they pulled out all the stops to protect three members of a modern-day slave patrol who saw this young man who just out for a run. Albeit he did enter a property that was under construction. But, you know, this property, again, is under construction. No one lives there. There's no furniture. What are you going to steal other than building supplies?
And there's no doors.
No doors. No
doors,
sign.
no windows.
Nothing posted to say no trespassing, right? So a lot of people have routinely gone to this house just to look. And if he had stolen some building supplies, that would be evident. This young man is running down the street. There's nothing in his hand to indicate he took anything. You know, after he lay dying on the streets, one of the defendants, Greg McMichael, pulled his arm out from under him to find out if he had a weapon. No. Let's think for a second. And folks, if you never follow another trial, follow this one. Because this kind of gives you an indication of just how far we've come or have not advanced in this country in terms of human relations, sometimes called race relations. You know, this happened in 2020. Just a year ago, or just over a year ago. You know, we're not talking about the turbulent 60s. We're not talking about the 50s. We're not talking about, you know, the era of the civil rights movement. We're talking the 21st century. And a young black man is out for a job. And a 911 call is made. And one of the defendants, Travis McMichael, was heard on this 911 tape saying a black man is running down the street. Not that a black man has committed a crime. Not that a black man is about to commit a crime. Not that I have any specific knowledge or evidence to suggest a crime has been committed or is about to be committed. Just the mere fact that a black man is running down the street. Something about the sight of this young man running down the street led two of these defendants to go in the house and arm themselves. Now, when you're a police officer, or pretty much anybody for that matter, what you do is based on the principle of the reasonable man or reasonable person. Would a reasonable person have reacted the same given the same set of circumstances? So if you see a black man running down the street, is your first instinct to run in the house and grab a gun? You know, I think that most people would look, see him running, and maybe look to see if somebody coming after him. You know, do you hear sirens? Is somebody calling for help? None of that happened. But for some reason, these two, anyway, felt the best course of action was to go and get a weapon. One got a .357, the other got a 12-gauge shotgun and decided to pursue him. But based on what? Yes, you saw him exit the house. You see him running down the street. There's nothing in his hands. What building materials can you put in your pockets?
And if I'm not mistaken, he had on shorts.
He had on shorts and a t-shirt. So where are you going to hide what it is you've allegedly stolen? And at some point, Greg McMichael, who should have been arrested from day one, he and his son Travis, in fact, all of them should have been arrested. You know, the first officer who responded, he said he said as he was approaching the location, he heard shots going off. But when he got to the scene, he said he did a scan to see if there was any immediate threats to him. You just said shots were fired. You don't know at whom, you don't know in which direction. All you know is you heard clearly shots being fired. What do you mean that was not a threat to you? He said when he arrived, he didn't feel threatened. Well, you know that someone has been shot because this young man is laying in the street. The life is draining from his body. And you're saying there's no threat? Someone fired this shot. Someone is armed, yet you relax. So much so to the point where you're getting in the truck with one of the defendants to view the footage from his phone. You know, as a former police officer, if you arrive on the scene and there is someone lying in the street who is mortally wounded, the first thing you want to do, if the actors are still on the scene, you want to make sure that those actors are under control, meaning you want to arrest them, put them in handcuffs, secure them in a car. You want to preserve the scene integrity. None of that was done in this case. And when the evidence was turned over to the prosecutor, the initial prosecutor, I believe her name was Jackie Johnson, she went out of her way to hide evidence and to prevent the officers from conducting a thorough investigation. Why? Because there was a relationship between her and one of the defendants. Greg McMichael is a former police officer who was an investigator for Glenn County for that particular prosecutor. So, of course, she should have recused herself immediately because of that past relationship. Instead, what she did was she covered up the evidence, discouraged officers from investigating to get evidence for a prosecution. I mean, we haven't seen stuff like this since Emmett Till. And, you know, the 21st century, and this is still the reality for young black men, black women in this country. You know, we talk about how far we have advanced, yet we're going backwards in so many different areas. I mean, now the right to vote is being threatened. And, you know, in this case, the judge noted prior to the start of the trial that in a county like Glenn County, Georgia, I think the population is 40% African American, and yet one black person is on the jury. The judge took note of that, and it's clear, at least in the judge's estimate, that black jurors are being systematically excluded from serving on this panel. This is one of the most egregious miscarriages of justice that we've seen in years. I mean, yeah, we've seen some really bad movies. We've seen Trayvon Martin. We've seen the young man Jordan Davis killed for loud music. We've seen some really bad ones. But this one, clearly, there is a cover-up. There is no possibility. There is no conspiracy theory. This is clear. When the prosecutor, whose job it is to protect the citizens of this county, to bring justice for those who are victims of crime, this is the woman who was covering up the evidence and preventing the officers from investigating. So, folks, again, I would urge you, if you're going to watch any trial this year, this month, this century, watch this one. Because this one is telling, really telling on the state of affairs in this country, particularly in the southern states. I mean, what do you think, TP?
Well, unfortunately, it's a sad situation, but I have to go back to the politics of 2020.
Right.
And those politics of 2020 goes back to that man that was in the White House.
Right.
He set the tone for a lot of these things that happened.
Yeah.
And had he not set the tone, I don't think that those men would have went in their house and armed themselves and became a lynch mob.
You know, it's difficult to say simply because Greg McMichael was a member of law enforcement in Glenn County. Mm-hmm. So he's familiar with not just the prosecutor, but some of the officers that he served with. Mm-hmm. And based on some of the statements that the three of them have made, there was no thought in their mind that they would be prosecuted.
Absolutely.
Because after you just committed the crime of murder and the police want to question you, most people are going to immediately say, I want a lawyer. Mm-hmm. They never asked for a lawyer because they didn't think they needed one. And had it not have been for that video being leaked, we never would have known the story of Ahmaud Arbery.
That's right.
This brother would have been buried, and his story would have been buried with him. Yes, his grieving mother and father and his family and the community, they would have known the story, but would they have ever had the platform to air that story and tell the world what happened? You know, and that's one of the things that makes this so egregious, that Ahmaud Arbery was killed February 23rd, 2020. It wasn't until, I think, 3 months later that this video surfaced. And we saw just a snippet of what happened to Ahmaud Arbery. So for you folks that don't have the opportunity to watch the trial, this video is much longer. And when you see it in its entirety, and when you see it in its context, you understand that these members of this modern day slave patrol pursued this young man for 5 whole minutes.
That's a long time.
A long time to be running for your life. And that's what this young man was doing, running for his very life. And what had he done?
Absolutely.
He did visit the house that was under construction. No trespassing signs are posted. No doors, no windows. He went in, he looked around, and he came out and he continued down the street. Now, I think it's important to keep some things in mind. This happened on a Sunday morning, right? Or sometime on a Sunday. Well, if you're going to commit a crime, would you do it at a time when most of the residents are home? I mean, most burglaries are going to occur typically at night, usually when there are no people around, right, that can identify you, that see you going in and exiting with the proceeds of a burglary. So we're to believe that Ahmaud Arbery decides to go in, gets up Sunday morning and says, you know what? I'm going to go and steal some stuff from this house that's under construction. And I'm going to do it at a time when most people are home. people have, of course, surveillance cameras. So I'm going to do it in broad daylight when most people are home and when people have their surveillance cameras active. So we're saying this guy is a complete fool. You know, this was never, clearly there was no intent, at least on Ahmaud Arbery's part, to take anything, because nothing was taken. They never found anything on him that came from that house. They tried to say they believe he had a weapon. Well, I'm not going to let you chase me for 5 minutes running for my life if I have a gun. This is going to end real quick. Either you're going to get me or I'm going to get you. But I'm not going to be running up and down the streets from you for 5 minutes. And in this 5-minute trek, they're trying to cut him off. They're trying to hit him with the truck. You better believe if Ahmaud Arbery had a gun,
he would have used it.
He certainly would have used it and would have been justified. Would have been clearly 100% justified when somebody uses a 4,000-pound pickup truck against you as a weapon. Yes, you are justified in protecting yourself. This was not about, as the McMichaels is saying, this is about self-defense. Well, what were you defending yourself from?
You got a 4,000-pound pickup truck, a 12-gauge shotgun, and a .357.
Right.
A man got a T-shirt and shorts on.
Right.
And tennis shoes.
And he's running away from you.
Away from you.
Right. So if somebody is running toward you, right, you might be able to articulate a reason why you might be afraid. But this young man is running away from you, right? So what do you mean self-defense? So, you know, getting back to this reasonable person, reasonable man theory, it is now the task of the defense attorneys to prove that a reasonable person would have acted exactly the same given the same sort of circumstances. And that's probably why they work so hard to exclude Black jurors. Because as Black people, we've seen people running down the streets all of our lives. And we didn't go run in the house and call the police. We didn't run in the house and arm ourselves and go in pursuit. You see people running by, okay, somebody's running. If there is some other activity afterwards, you see somebody coming after this person, you see the police coming. There's an indication that there is some sort of criminal activity. But running alone does not indicate that there has been a crime. And that is what the McMichaels and their defense attorneys are trying to prove. You know, I was watching it before coming here, and they have the, I just want to lead detectives on the stand, and they're trying to get him to say that a burglary could have been committed at this residence. Well, burglary, in truth, you don't have to take anything to commit a burglary. According to the statute, or many statutes, burglary begins when you enter upon or into a premise with an intent to commit a crime. But if there's no intent, if you walk in, you look around and you leave, clearly there's no intent. There's no overt act suggesting that you're trying to take something.
But so, you also have to breach the premises. There was no breach. There was no doors. There was no windows. What did you breach? There wasn't even a gate.
And no trespassing signs as well, right? So, you know, and again, this is something that, and we've known early on that people routinely came up to this house and they looked around in it. So, you know, people who may be potential home buyers.
You know what's ironic about that?
What's that?
When I was building my house here, in the Colton house, I would come up to my house on many occasions, and people would be at my house, walking through my house.
Right.
But during various stages of the construction, In fact, some of my neighbors, I got to meet them because they was curious as to what was going on inside my house.
Absolutely.
You know?
When I was building my house, other sites, I go and I look at the other sites and we would walk around, right? It was just curiosity.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, for the most part, there's really nothing to take. There's a bunch of building materials, nothing you can take, right?
Who's carrying all that stuff out of there?
Exactly, right? I mean,
even if you got your car.
Right. And of course, he had no means of taking anything anywhere because he doesn't have so much as a bike, he's on foot. So what are you going to take and where are you going to hide it? But, when I say this is a modern day slave patrol, the slave patrol was actually the first police agency in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And they went out and they were tasked with accosting Black people, Black men, Black women, Black children, whoever. If you were outside of the confines of the plantation, they would come up to you and they would question you. And you had no rights. You had to answer their questions. And if they didn't like your answers, well, they could lynch you. They could mutilate you. They could beat the hell out of you. They could kill you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess in the mind of these three defendants, I guess they figured that Ahmaud Arbery was obligated to answer their questions. But let's set the scene for a second.
The brother was afraid.
Terrified. He's out jogging. And now you have not one, but two pickup trucks that are in pursuit. And not only are they in pursuit, they're yelling at you. At one point, Greg McMichaels admitted in his taped interview that he told a guy, yelled at him, "Stop, or I'll blow your head off." Now, if somebody tells me you're going to blow my head off, do you really think I'm going to stop for you and let you blow my head off? Of course, I'm going to do everything in my power to get as far away from you as possible. And that is clearly what Ahmaud was trying to do, trying to find an avenue of escape. But you had one defendant, I think it's William Bryant.
Mm-hmm.
He's driving him in the direction of the other two, the McMichaels. I mean, William Bryant admitted in his taped interview that he tried to hit him with his truck. So in other words, what you're doing is you've committed an assault, false imprisonment, you admitting to these crimes, and yet all three of them walked out of the police station. So you have a number of crimes committed prior to the murder, yet no prosecution. And what I find interesting is for the two, not just one, but two prosecutors who declined to prosecute, citing lack of evidence. If there was no evidence in 2020, how is there so much now? The same information that they are being tried on existed over a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, the prosecutors are saying, well, there's not enough evidence. Stevie Wonder could see that there's evidence in this case. Again, for the first officer, you roll up and there's a person lying in the street who's
in a
mortally
pool of blood.
wounded.
And he said he heard the death gurgle.
Right. So he's dying. So you don't know who fired the shots.
Then he said there was no fingerprints taken from the weapon because it was considered contaminated because of the blood on the gun.
But not only that, that Travis McMichael, the younger McMichael, you see the picture of him covered in blood. So now it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. You've heard gunshots. You pull up on the scene, there's a man lying, dying in the street. There's another man covered in blood. So that gives you a pretty good indication of what happened, right? The person covered in blood is probably your primary suspect. That person should have been arrested immediately.
Mm-hmm.
The weapon should have been seized immediately.
That weapon was in somebody else's yard. You know?
I mean, it gets worse. It gets worse as each day passes. I mean, the level of ineptitude down there that you roll up on a crime scene.
The police officer was afraid for his life.
But okay, you know what?
That's what he said.
Okay, but you know what you could do? Call for backup, right? These folks, the McMichaels, and this guy William Bryant,
they all knew each other.
They knew each other. They lived in the same development. But not only that, neither one of them thought that we're going to get in trouble for this. So there was no attempt to flee. Afterwards, they stayed there. They stayed right there. This guy's covered in blood. Never thought, let me go wash up, change my clothes. Why? Because I don't need to hide the evidence. Because my daddy is friends with the prosecutor. So I don't have to worry about this. And that was the case until this video leaked. I'm not really sure.
Well, see, that goes to show you that there are still some good people in America, in spite of it all.
Well, I think it was Bryant that released.
Yeah.
Right.
Because his conscience got the best of him. He leaked the video because he probably leaked it bragging.
That's a possibility.
He probably leaked it bragging. But there's still some people in America who have a conscience, and there's some good people in America, and they said that, you know what, this ain't right. Well, this ain't right. And they leaked the video, and they said, look, this ain't right.
And you know what? There are good people in America, right? The problem is their deeds are overshadowed by all the negativity that we see on a daily basis, and we become so desensitized to human suffering, right? But I don't know the circumstance of why he released this video, but it's a good thing he did. Because now these three are on trial and Ahmaud's story is being told. And
can you just imagine the conversation that they're having while they're in prison, while they're in jail together? They cussing him out.
Well, they probably are. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because for the first officer, when you get there and you observe this scene, you call for backup immediately. Once you do that, one of the first things you do, now, as a responding officer, right, first on the scene, I'm going to report what I have. I'm going to get additional units there. We're going to secure these three individuals because I know I have a person who is dying on the ground, right? So I know that a crime has been committed, right? This person is dying. So what I have is at this time an attempted homicide, right? And I know I have three individuals. One of them was covered in blood. Clear indication that he is involved in this case. So I'm going to place those three in custody. I'm going to get my backup there, and I'm going to secure this crime scene. Yet, for these three individuals, they never separated. They were allowed to sit there and talk to one another. They were allowed to sit there and talk to one another.
I hear everything. You hear them too. The volume just dropped low.
Yeah. In a case of Greg McMichael, what happened with him? He was going around talking to some of the witnesses as the police officers were talking to witnesses. Greg McMichael would just walk up. How do you allow a suspect in your homicide to come and listen to the conversation you're having with a potential witness? So this is something that
The fix was in from the start.
There you go. And this is just, it's just utter ineptitude that you would allow this to happen, that you're going to have a suspect listening to your witnesses and listen to their statements. You know, I mean, that's insane. But that just goes to show you, right, that there was no intent of the police officers to make an arrest. Because, I mean, when you roll up on that scene and you see this young man dying, what you have is a homicide. And you have the suspect, he's covered in blood, right? So why didn't you make an arrest? You let them come down to the station voluntarily, and then you let them walk out. After now you know Ahmaud Arbery has expired. You know that this young man has been killed. And based on their statements, you know who did it. In fact, you know, listen to, I guess it was maybe yesterday, you know, Greg McMichael said to his son after he fired these fatal rounds, well, you know, you had no choice. What do you mean you didn't have a choice? The choice was to call the police. The choice was if you're under reasonable belief that he's committed a crime, if you want to get in your truck and follow him at a safe distance, that's a choice.
Absolutely.
You know,
absolutely.
To go and arm yourself to try to cut this young man off and to fire 2 shots that killed him, you made a choice to arm yourself, to go out and pursue him, and ultimately to kill him.
That was his intentions.
Well, that's what the slave patrols did.
That was his intention. That was his intention.
Well, you know, part of any case, you want to try to prove intent, right? You know, because accidents do happen. But in this case, you went and got a .357 and your son a shotgun, right? So you've already made an overt act. If you thought he stole something, well, you see him running up, you don't see anything in his hands that would indicate anything was taken. So why do you think you need to arm yourself? And you call the police, why not give a description and a direction of flight? Now, Greg McMichael said that he went and got his gun because he doesn't take chances. He also said if I would have fired a shot, I would not have missed. So the intent was clear. You know, as a police officer, which he was, you know, at this point, there's no probable cause. He's running down the street. Nobody said, help me. Nothing in his hands that would indicate there was a crime. So what are you going to stop? Either as a police officer, what are you going to stop him for? Where are you coming from? Well, he doesn't have to answer. You know, I mean, a lot of people don't realize that, but, you know, when the police come up to you and ask you questions, you don't have to answer any of them. You know, I mean, a lot of U.S. law is based on Old English common law. So there's something called the common law right of inquiry, where you come up to somebody and ask them their name, you know, pedigree information, name, their date of birth, and where they live. But once you begin to ask them any question related to a crime, that person could tell you, I'm not telling you nothing. You know, and if you're going to detain me for any period of time, I'm calling my attorney. Because that means I'm under arrest. So, but a lot of people just figure, well, they're taking you in for questioning. Well, no, there's really no such thing as taking you in for questioning. Either you're under arrest or you're not. Can you detain someone while you're conducting an investigation? Yes. Does that mean you're going to put them in jail? No, not necessarily. So in this case, there was no probable cause because no crime had been committed. So there was no reason for the police to stop him. And there was certainly no reason for Greg McMichael, his son, and William Bryant to stop him either. Because what had he done? And, you know, I think that people of color in this country, we have to pay close attention to what happens here. We sat and we watched the Trayvon Martin trial.
Yes.
And we expected justice. I'm not sure why we had that expectation, but we did. So many cases like Trayvon Martin's, like Ahmaud Arbery, we got the same old treatment from America. We got a sham of a trial and then not guilty. You know, we watched Rodney King. We watched Rodney King being beaten like he was on Master Jones' plantation.
Mm-hmm.
And the police, their defense was, well, we were afraid. This man was face down on the ground, being beaten all over his body with batons.
That's right.
What are you afraid of? There's multiple cops out there with pistols, batons, tasers. What are you afraid of? When they went into court, their defense was, well, essentially, this defendant, right, is basically a big, strong gorilla. And we were terrified of him. So much so that this is what we had to do to bring him under control. This defendant, and his name escapes me right now, was driving a Hyundai, and they said he was up with 90 miles an hour. Well, that's what they had to do to control an unarmed suspect. Just like they had to put Eric Garner in a chokehold to control an unarmed suspect. Down in Georgia, you had 2 armed suspects, yet no restraint technique to control 2 armed suspects who have actually killed someone. So why the disparity? Why is it that Eric Garner sells loose cigarettes and you got to choke him out to bring him under control?
But they also said Rodney King was on PCP.
Yeah, everybody's on something, right?
Yeah, right.
You know, I mean, they tried to say Trayvon Martin was, they created some new thing called grape drink.
Mm-hmm.
I never heard of that, but they said he was on some grape drink, right? And because of that, he's this big, strong gorilla. And of course, George Zimmerman, who just minding his own business, who just defending his area from the big, strong gorilla, went out there after he was told to remain in his house and not pursue him. He goes out there and he shoots and kills him. And the people on the jury said, I can identify with George. George was afraid. This young man who was wearing a hoodie, and anybody knows if you wear a hoodie, you're a criminal. You know, the reverberations of that are right now in school districts here in this area. Like Pokemon School District, you can't wear a hoodie to school. Right. That is the rule. You cannot, you know, since this happened with Trayvon Martin, you cannot wear a hoodie in school. Because everybody knows if you're wearing a hoodie, there's got to be some gang affiliation. You've got to be up to no good.
Unless you're white.
Yet, we have 2 armed suspects. One of them has shot and killed Ahmaud Arbery. And yet, you don't pull a weapon. You don't pull your police-issued weapon. How do you not feel threatened when a murder's been committed? You're watching this guy die. You know one of these people has pulled the trigger. You don't feel threatened. Yet you feel threatened by Rodney King, by Trayvon Martin, by so many other young black men or brown men.
You know,
feel
Ron,
threatened by them.
I'm just so numb to this right now.
Yeah, we are.
I'm just so numb to it because you know what? Sometimes I have to remind myself that I'm closer to 60 than I am to 50.
Right.
And that, I can't run around here talking about fight the power, because I get so angry. I want to act out.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go out and get revenge.
Right.
I want revenge.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But is that the right thing? Is that the right thing? Because you know what? I am so tired. I'm sick and tired of seeing these young black men murdered in the streets for senseless things at the hands of police officers and at the hands of people who think that the life of a black man doesn't matter.
Right.
Now even if it's another black man.
Right.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he's white or black.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get revenge for anybody who takes the life of another human being senselessly for no reason. And if you're doing it because he's white or because he's black, that makes it even worse.
But now you asked a question. You said, is it right? The answer to that is it's not right for us. But there was an allegation of a young black man attacking a woman in an elevator in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And because of that, the people went into Black Wall Street and burned the entire town to the ground.
And that turned out to be a false
allegation.
Yes.
The group, I think it was the brothers on the subway, or not the subway, the freight train. I think it's the Greensboro boys.
Mm-hmm. Another
allegation of rape. Some of those brothers were lynched. Mm-hmm. Turns out, false allegation.
You want to hear something funny? Remember I told you last week I got in trouble at work?
Yeah.
Right? And what happened was I was standing behind another woman who was buzzing trying to get into a school.
Mm-hmm.
And she was upset about whatever was going on. Had nothing to do with it. I was just happened to be standing behind her. And I'm dark skinned.
Right.
And she was in front of me. And she was a woman of color. But she spoke Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just standing behind her. So, but I read the sign and it said that, that the reception area to get into this vocational school was moved down to the door number 2.
Right.
So I went and walked down the door number 2. I walked in the door number 2. And the receptionist wants to give me the business because she assumed I was with the woman that was at door number 1, giving them the business over the intercom.
Right.
Because I was standing behind her. Had nothing to do with it. Right. But the resource officer at the school comes out and immediately wants to give me the business.
Right.
And I did say some bullshit.
Right.
I did say to the lady.
Mm-hmm.
I said to the police officer.
Right.
Because I told him, I have nothing to do with this, whatever's going on with that woman.
Right. I don't know her.
I'm not with her.
Right.
So you coming to me is some bullshit.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because you, systemic racism, you assuming that because she looks like me, that we're together.
Absolutely.
And we're not together.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's giving you all the business, she's giving her the business in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And I clearly don't have an accent. You know what I mean? I clearly don't have an accent.
Right.
It has nothing to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But the woman heard me say this is some bullshit. So she complained that I said this is some bullshit.
Right.
So she made it seem like I said this is some bullshit to her.
Right.
Because she wanted to be the white damsel in distress.
Mm-hmm.
So the big black gorilla won't get in trouble.
Right. And you know something? There's so many assumptions. This whole case, this whole Ahmaud Arbery trial is based on assumptions. We assume he took something. We assume he was running away. We assume we needed to stop him. We assume we needed our weapons. We assume that he had a weapon. We assume that we had no choice but to use deadly physical force. You know, the whole world is going crazy, right? It's getting worse.
Yes.
And I'll tell you something I observed the other day. I went to the men's room at work. And in the men's room is a plastic bin filled with women's sanitary products. So I thought it was a joke. Then I went into another men's room and I observed the same thing. So what I was told by management is that now all bathrooms are essentially gender neutral. So in every men's room are women's feminine products. In the men's room, every men's room has women's feminine products. Right. That's the state that we're in this country. And I know that's aside from what we were talking about, but it's just the insanity that's happening in this country. You know, and Ahmaud Arbery is just an example of, I can't stress enough, such a egregious example of the insanity in this country. You know, we're not talking about killing foreign terrorists. We're talking about killing an American citizen
On American soil.
On American soil whose only crime was jogging while black.
Yes.
And people try to defend this action over and over and over. You know, we had a young black man sitting in Central Park bird watching, who had the presence of mind to film this interaction with this woman who he only asked to put your dog on a leash, which is the law in New York City. And she's on caption, on video, calling 911, saying that this man is threatening her. If he had not filmed that interaction, we might have been talking about him. He might have been another victim of living in black skin. So, folks, as I said at the onset, I would urge you to follow this trial, to follow it closely. You know, I mean, we got into the R. Kelly trial. We followed that. But this is more important. You know, I don't know how much we can do for R. Kelly right now. But for Ahmaud Arbery right now, we need justice. His mother is in that courtroom every day. That woman needs and deserves justice.
Justice. That's right.
And, you know, for us, we can't turn away.
No.
We need to be putting pressure, you know, because just over a year ago, we went out in record numbers and we put Joe Biden into the White House. So we need to be calling down to remind Uncle Joe, Grandpa Joe, hey, we're the ones that tilted this election in your favor in places like Philadelphia and some of these other major urban centers. Remember that when you see the trial of Ahmaud Arbery. Remember that when you talk about programs aimed at the inner cities of this country. You know, and I don't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican. I mean, because I'm neither one. But the fact of the matter is, if you're going to vote, make your vote count.
That's right.
If you're going to live in this country, make your presence known. Because other people have. Other people made their presence known to the degree that they went up in the Capitol. They stormed the building to let people know, hey, we in the house. And we're going to be heard. I'm not saying we need to carry it to that extent. But we do need to let people know, hey, we are here. We've been here. We've contributed in more ways than we can count to this country. And we're not going to take it anymore. if we have to draw the line somewhere. I think it might have been Malcolm that said, if you don't stand for something, you're gonna fall for everything. And we've been falling for way too damn long.
That's right.
You know, we need to stand up. And we need to be heard, and we need to protect ourselves. You know, because if we don't, we're going to be picked off one by one. And you see it happening. Ahmaud Arbery is just an example of being picked off.
But can you imagine how many Ahmaud Arbery's out there we just don't know about?
You know, literally thousands. You know, so many people were hung from the trees, strange fruit. We'll never know their names.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the only people that know are the people in town and their family and friends. But we'll never know their names. They'll never make CNN or HLN.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there are so many souls and spirits that are craving justice. Ahmaud Arbery is now one of them, craving justice. Justice he so sorely deserves. So, folks, I would urge you, follow this trial. You know, listen to what is being said. And then, you know, like they said in the movie Malcolm X, go behind the words. Because sometimes what's being used is cold language.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Cold language is being used because they don't want to come out and say certain things. So there's cold language, you know, but if you listen, you know who they're talking about. You know, I said this is murder in black and white because that's exactly what it is. They went and purposely excluded black jurors. A town that is 40 or a county that's 40% black and one person of color is on the jury. This is exactly what they did in the South 60 or 70 years ago. Packed the jury with all Caucasians. And in that time, in that era, there was not a Caucasian jury that would convict a Caucasian man for killing a black man. Because to them, a black man's life was not worth it. It was not worth putting a good, hard-working Caucasian man in jail just for killing one of them. And that's the same sort of mentality that exists today right down in Brunswick, Georgia.
Right.
And sadly, it's not just in Brunswick, Georgia. It's down in Florida with Ahmaud Arbery. It's in other parts of Georgia, Jordan Davis, and so many others, and the list goes on and on and on. So, folks, you know, we're getting close to that time. So we're going to end, but I want to leave you with this thought. What if that were one of our children? You know, not only does Ahmaud Arbery need justice, his mother, who has to relive this over and over and over on a daily basis, seeing the video of her son, seeing one of the defendants, Travis McMichael, covered in her son's blood, to have to see that every day, that woman needs our support. That woman needs us to give her strength, to send positive energy her way, because this woman is in for the fight of her life. She lost her son, and all he was doing was jogging. And the government tried to cover it up, so much so that they had to arrest one of the prosecutors down there who was supposedly handling this case. So, folks, we need to start coming together. And, you know, we did it for George Floyd. We need to do the same thing for Ahmaud Arbery. So many of these others whose names we have forgotten because there's been so many of us that hung from trees, that disappeared, that died in places like Rosewood and the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You know, they're gone, but we don't need to forget them. So, folks, it's unfortunate we have to have this conversation, but it's a conversation that we must have. So I'm so glad that, for those of you that tuned in, I hope you get something from this, and I hope you will watch this trial and understand where we are as a people in this country, how the world sees us, and what's most important, how we see one another. So we're gonna step aside, and we're gonna make way for Hot Sauce and the crew.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll be back next Tuesday with another topic, another hot topic. So we thank y'all for listening. Peace.
Peace.